What if I told you that history has been keeping a secret? A pattern so consistent, so mathematically precise, that it predicted the rise and fall of every major superpower for the last 3,000 years. The Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks under Alexander, Rome, the Arab Caliphate, the Ottomans, the Spanish, the British, every single one of them, different continents, different centuries, different technologies, different religions. And yet, somehow, they all shared the same lifespan, 250 years, give or take a decade. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The United States of America declared its independence on July 4th, 1776. If you add 250 years to that date, you arrive at the year 2026. That's not next century. That's not some distant future. That's next year. But before you click away, thinking this is just another doomsday prediction from some random guy on the internet, I need you to understand something important. This theory doesn't come from conspiracy forums or fringe websites. It comes from one of the most decorated military minds of the 20th century, a man who spent his entire life studying how civilizations rise, peak, and transform. His name was Sir John Bagot Glubb, and in 1976, exactly 200 years after America's founding, he published an essay that would quietly become one of the most influential pieces of historical analysis ever written. So who was this man, and why should we take his research seriously? John Glubb was born in 1897 in Preston, England, the son of a Royal Engineers officer. From childhood, his life was marked by travel and exposure to different cultures. At just 4 years old, his family moved to Mauritius. At 10, he was schooled in Switzerland. These early experiences would shape his worldview in ways that would prove invaluable later. In 1914, at 17, Glubb entered the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich. By 1915, he was commissioned as an officer in the Royal Engineers and shipped off to France to fight in World War I. He served with distinction on the Western Front, was wounded 3 times in combat, and was awarded the Military Cross for bravery. But it was after the war that Glubb's real education began. In 1920, he volunteered for service in Iraq, and for the next 3 decades he immersed himself in the Arab world. He learned Arabic fluently, adopted local customs, and earned the nickname Glubb Pasha from the people he served alongside. From 1939 to 1956, he commanded the Arab Legion of Jordan, transforming it into one of the most effective fighting forces in the Middle East. He worked alongside kings and presidents. He witnessed the birth and death of nations firsthand. He wasn't an armchair academic, theorizing from a university office. He was a man who had lived through the death throes of the British Empire and watched new powers emerge from its ashes. After his retirement, Glubb turned to scholarship. He wrote dozens of books on history, warfare, and civilization. But it was his 1976 essay, The Fate of Empires and Search for Survival, that would become his lasting legacy. In just a few dozen pages, Glubb presented a thesis that would challenge everything we think we know about why great powers fall. Not through invasion, not through revolution, but through a predictable, almost biological process of internal transformation. And the data he compiled was startling. Assyria, 247 years. Persia, 208 years. Greece, under Alexander's successors, 231 years. The Roman Republic, 233 years. The Arab Empire, 246 years. The Ottoman Empire at its zenith, 250 years. Spain, 250 years. The British Empire, 250 years. The average, roughly 10 generations, about 250 years. But Glubb wasn't just interested in the numbers. He wanted to understand why. What was it about human societies that made them follow this pattern so consistently? And more importantly, could understanding this pattern help us avoid repeating the mistakes of the past? The answer, he believed, lay in understanding 6 distinct stages that every great power passes through. And as we'll see, the United States has exhibited every single one of them. Every empire begins the same way. Not with armies or gold, but with courage. Glubb called this first stage the Age of Pioneers, and he noticed something remarkable about how it always begins. It starts with a small group of people, often from the margins of civilization, who possess an extraordinary combination of energy, ambition, and willingness to take risks that more established societies have lost. Think about the Arab conquest of the 7th century. In the year 600 AD, the Arabs were considered a backwater people, scattered nomads wandering the desert peninsula, while great empires like Persia and Byzantium divided the civilized world between them. Yet within just 70 years of the Prophet Muhammad's death in 632, Arab armies had conquered Persia entirely, taken half of the Byzantine Empire, and reached the borders of India and China. How? According to Glubb, it was precisely their position as outsiders that gave them their power. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain. They were hungry in a way that fat, comfortable empires could never be. The same pattern repeated with the Mongols under Genghis Khan, a scattered collection of tribal peoples from the steppes, who, within a single generation, created the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Now think about the American colonies in the 18th century. Here were 13 scattered settlements clinging to the edge of a vast, unknown continent. Their population was a fraction of Great Britain's. Their economy was primitive by European standards. They had no professional army, no navy worth mentioning, no established institutions of higher learning, no significant industrial capacity. And yet, these ragtag colonists dared to challenge the greatest military power on earth. The men who signed the Declaration of Independence in July 1776 knew exactly what they were risking. They weren't keyboard warriors posting opinions from safety. They were putting their actual lives on the line. As Benjamin Franklin allegedly quipped, "We must all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." The founding generation was remarkably young. Thomas Jefferson was just 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. James Madison was 36 at the Constitutional Convention. Alexander Hamilton was 33 when he became the first Secretary of the Treasury. Even George Washington, who felt like the elder statesman, was only 44 when he took command of the Continental Army. These weren't men who inherited their positions through family connections. Benjamin Franklin was born the 10th son of a soapmaker. Alexander Hamilton was an orphaned immigrant from the Caribbean. They rose through merit, through audacity, through an unwavering belief that they could build something better than what existed before. Glubb identified several key characteristics that define pioneer generations. First, they possess an almost reckless courage. When George Washington led his freezing troops across the Delaware River on Christmas night 1776 to attack the Hessian garrison at Trenton, he wasn't following a safe, calculated strategy. He was gambling everything on a desperate gambit that could have ended in total disaster. Second, pioneers have a powerful sense of unity and shared purpose. The phrase, "we the people" in the Constitution wasn't just rhetoric. These colonists genuinely saw themselves as creating something new, something that belonged to all of them equally. Personal ambition existed, of course, but it was channeled toward collective goals. Third, and perhaps most importantly, pioneers value honor and duty above personal wealth. When Washington was offered command of the Continental Army, he declined any salary, asking only to be reimbursed for his expenses. Over 8 years of war, he spent around $160,000 of his own money on the cause. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $5 million today. By the war's end, he had lost half his net worth. This wasn't unique to Washington. The founding generation genuinely believed in what John Adams called public virtue, the idea that citizens must be willing to sacrifice their personal interests for the common good. Without this spirit, Adams wrote, there can be no Republican government, nor any real liberty. The pioneer generation built the institutions that would shape American life for centuries. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the separation of powers, the independent judiciary. These weren't inherited from Britain. They were innovations, created by men who dared to imagine a different kind of government. But here's what Glubb understood. The very success of pioneers contains the seeds of transformation. The courage and sacrifice that built the nation create wealth and security, and wealth and security, over time, change what people value. The children of pioneers don't face the same struggles. They inherit a world their parents built, and while they may honor their ancestors' sacrifices, they can't fully understand them. This is where stage 2 begins. If the age of pioneers is about survival, the age of conquests is about expansion. The young nation that barely scraped through its war for independence now begins to grow. Military victories multiply. Territory expands. The original energy of the pioneers is channeled into organized, disciplined power projection. Glubb noted that during this stage, societies develop professional military structures. The ragtag militias of the founding era give way to trained armies with clear hierarchies, standardized equipment, and systematic training. Glory in battle becomes a primary aspiration for young men. For America, this stage began almost immediately after independence and accelerated throughout the 19th century. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the nation's size overnight. President Jefferson bought 828,000 square miles of territory from Napoleon for just $15 million, roughly 4 cents per acre. The decision was controversial at the time. Jefferson himself wasn't sure if the Constitution gave him the authority to make such a purchase, but the opportunity was too great to pass up. This purchase set the template for what would become known as manifest destiny, the belief that American expansion across the continent was not just possible, but inevitable, even divinely ordained. The 1840s saw explosive growth. Texas was annexed in 1845. The Oregon Territory was secured through negotiation with Britain in 1846. And the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848 brought California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming under American control. By mid-century, the United States stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. A nation that had started as a thin strip of colonies along the eastern seaboard now controlled an empire-sized territory. During the Age of Conquests, certain values dominate society. Military service is honored above almost all other professions. Courage in battle is the highest virtue. The nation celebrates its heroes and views expansion as a sign of divine favor. Think about how Americans in the 19th century viewed figures like Andrew Jackson, Ulysses S. Grant, or William Tecumseh Sherman. These were not just military leaders, they were national icons, whose fame propelled them to the highest offices in the land. The Civil War, despite its horrific cost, can be understood within this framework as well. It was an internal conflict about the nation's direction, but it was fought with the same aggressive energy that characterized external expansion. When it ended, the United States emerged as a more unified and powerful entity than ever before. By the late 19th century, American ambitions extended beyond the continent. The Spanish-American War of 1898 brought Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines under American control. The annexation of Hawaii the same year gave the nation a foothold in the Pacific. World War I marked America's arrival as a global power. Though the nation entered late, its intervention proved decisive. American troops, supplies, and financial resources helped tip the balance against Germany and Austria-Hungary. President Woodrow Wilson arrived at the Paris Peace Conference as perhaps the most influential figure in the room. And then came World War II. The Second World War represents the peak of America's Age of Conquests. The nation mobilized on a scale never seen before. 16 million Americans served in uniform. American factories produced more weapons, vehicles, and supplies than all other nations combined. American military power defeated fascism in Europe and militarism in Asia simultaneously. When the war ended in 1945, the United States stood astride the world like a colossus, the only major combatant whose homeland remained unscathed, the only nation with nuclear weapons, the largest economy on Earth by a massive margin. This was America's moment of maximum power. But Glubb's theory suggests that such moments of triumph are always turning points. The very success of conquest creates new conditions that change what comes next. Military glory becomes less necessary once there's nothing left to conquer. The warrior virtues that built the empire begin to seem old-fashioned, and a new value starts to replace honor as the primary aspiration of citizens. That value is wealth. This transition marks the beginning of Stage 3. The Age of Commerce is where things get interesting, and it's where many historians believe the United States currently resides, though signs point to later stages as well. According to Glubb, the conquest of vast territories under one government automatically stimulates commerce. Merchants and goods can move freely across enormous distances. Different regions with different climates produce varied products that people want to exchange. Trade routes that were once dangerous become safe under imperial protection. He pointed to the Arab Caliphate of the 8th and 9th centuries, which achieved fabulous wealth because its massive territory functioned as a single trade zone. What we now call the Middle East, divided into some 25 separate nations with their own borders, tariffs, and regulations, was once unified under a single administration that let commerce flow freely. The same pattern appeared in the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and it appeared in post-war America. After 1945, the United States led the creation of a new international order designed to promote global trade. The Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's reserve currency. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade reduced barriers between nations. American military power guaranteed the security of shipping lanes from the Pacific to the Atlantic. The result was an explosion of prosperity unlike anything in human history. The 1950s and 1960s saw American living standards soar. Suburban homes, automobiles in every garage, television sets in every living room, college education for the masses. The American middle class became the envy of the world. This wasn't just domestic success. American corporations spread across the globe. Coca-Cola, IBM, General Motors, Ford. These companies became synonymous with modernity itself. To develop was to Americanize. The dollar's position as the world's reserve currency gave Americans an extraordinary privilege. Other countries had to earn dollars through exports or borrowing to participate in global trade. America could simply print them. As of 2025, the dollar still accounts for roughly 58% of global foreign exchange reserves, far ahead of the euro at about 20%. But here's what Glubb noticed. The age of commerce transforms a society's values in subtle but profound ways. In the ages of pioneers and conquest, the primary ambition of citizens is glory and honor. Young men dream of military achievement, of serving their country, of being remembered for their courage. In the age of commerce, the primary ambition becomes wealth. Success is measured not by service rendered, but by money accumulated. The businessman replaces the soldier as the ideal citizen. This isn't entirely negative. Commercial societies are generally more peaceful than military ones. Trade creates interdependence between nations. War becomes bad for business. The long peace between major powers since 1945 owes much to economic integration. But something is lost in this transition. Glubb observed that commercial societies become increasingly pragmatic, even cynical about traditional values. Patriotism starts to seem old-fashioned. Military service is left to volunteers, rather than embraced as a civic duty. The bonds that united pioneer generations begin to fray. More importantly, the nature of wealth itself changes. In the early commercial period, fortunes are made by creating things, building businesses, developing innovations, contributing to the nation's productive capacity. But as time passes, more and more wealth comes from manipulation rather than creation. Financial engineering, asset speculation, moving money around rather than building things. The finance sector's share of the American economy has grown dramatically since the 1970s. In 1950, financial services accounted for about 2.8% of GDP. By 2024, that figure had grown to over 8%. Meanwhile, manufacturing has declined from roughly 28% to under 11%. This shift has profound implications. A society that makes things maintains certain virtues through necessity. Factories require discipline, cooperation, and long-term planning. Financial speculation rewards different qualities entirely. Glubb saw this pattern repeat across civilizations. The merchants who built fortunes through productive commerce gave way to speculators who built fortunes through clever manipulation. And as speculation became the fastest path to wealth, the values of the commercial class shifted accordingly. The stage was set for what comes next. The Age of Affluence is, according to Glubb, where empires enter the danger zone. On the surface, everything looks wonderful. The empire is rich, powerful, and secure. Living standards are high. Opportunities abound. To citizens enjoying the fruits of previous generations' sacrifices, it might seem like the golden age will last forever. But underneath this gleaming surface, something fundamental is changing. In the pioneer and conquest phases, wealth was earned through sacrifice and risk. The founders who built the fortune put everything on the line. They understood, viscerally, what it cost to create prosperity. In the affluent phase, wealth is increasingly inherited rather than earned. The children and grandchildren of the builders receive their position as a birthright. They may work hard, may be talented, may contribute in various ways, but they cannot truly understand the struggle that created their comfort. Glubb put it bluntly, money is the measure of all things now. Where pioneers valued honor, courage, and service, the affluent class values luxury, status, and consumption. Where earlier generations asked what they could contribute, later generations ask what they can acquire. The phrase that captures this shift is telling, high standards of living are fierce in their demand. Once people become accustomed to affluence, they expect it to continue. They feel entitled to comfort. Any reduction in living standards feels like an injustice, even if those standards were artificially inflated by debt or unsustainable practices. Looking at contemporary America through Glubb's lens reveals patterns that should concern us. Consider the national debt. As of December 2025, the total federal debt stands at over $38 trillion. That's roughly $284,000 per American household. The interest payments alone now exceed $1 trillion annually, more than the entire defense budget, more than Medicare. This debt represents, in a very real sense, affluence borrowed from the future. Previous generations could spend more than they earned because they shifted the bill to those who came after. The question now is whether the bill can ever be paid. Consider the wealth disparities. The gap between the richest Americans and everyone else has widened to levels not seen since the Gilded Age of the late 19th century. The top 1% now holds more wealth than the entire middle class combined. This isn't just an economic issue, it's a social one. In pioneer and conquest societies, there's a sense that everyone is in it together, that success is shared and sacrifices are mutual. In affluent societies, the classes drift apart. They live in different neighborhoods, attend different schools, consume different media. They begin to see each other not as fellow citizens, but as strangers, or even enemies. Consider the infrastructure. The United States built the world's most advanced highway system, the most extensive electrical grid, the most modern airports. That was decades ago. Today, bridges crumble, roads deteriorate, electrical systems fail under stress. The American Society of Civil Engineers consistently grades U.S. infrastructure at a C- or worse. Pioneer societies build, affluent societies maintain at best. More often, they coast on what previous generations created while directing resources toward consumption rather than investment. Perhaps most importantly, the Age of Affluence brings a psychological transformation. Citizens of affluent societies become risk-averse. They have too much to lose. The boldness that characterized pioneers, the willingness to stake everything on an uncertain outcome, gives way to a desperate clinging to what already exists. Military adventures become unpopular, not because people have become more ethical, but because they have become more comfortable. Why risk what we have for uncertain gains elsewhere? The defense budget becomes a target for reduction, not because threats have disappeared, but because the money could be better spent on programs that directly benefit citizens. The walls go up, figuratively and sometimes literally, as the empire shifts from expansion to protection of what it has. Glubb called this defensiveness, and he saw it as a warning sign. When empires stop reaching outward and start protecting inward, when growth is replaced by preservation, the trajectory is clear. But there's still one more stage before the final one. And in some ways, it's the most fascinating of all. The Age of Intellect sounds like it should be a good thing, and in many ways, it is. Glubb noticed that wealthy empires invariably invest heavily in education and scholarship. Universities are founded and endowed. Libraries are built. The pursuit of knowledge becomes a mark of status. Where previous generations sought glory through conquest and wealth through commerce, the intellectual class seeks distinction through academic achievement. He pointed to the Arab Empire under Caliph al-Mamun in the 9th century. Baghdad became the intellectual capital of the world. Arab scholars measured the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy, 7 centuries before Western Europe accepted that the world was even round. They translated the Greek classics, advanced mathematics, developed early chemistry. Then Glubb dropped a sobering observation. Less than 50 years after the amazing scientific discoveries under al-Mamun, the Arab Empire collapsed. The intellectual achievements were real and lasting. They contributed to the sum of human knowledge, but they did not save the empire from chaos. This pattern repeated elsewhere. The late Roman Empire produced sophisticated philosophers and legal theorists even as it crumbled. The Byzantine Empire sustained remarkable scholarship right up until Constantinople fell to the Ottomans. The British Empire created world-class universities that flourished even as the empire itself was dismantling. The United States has certainly entered its age of intellect. American universities dominate global rankings. American research institutions lead the world in scientific output. American technology companies have transformed how humans live, work, and communicate. So why did Glubb see this as a warning sign? The Age of Intellect brings a subtle but dangerous shift in values. In earlier stages, there was general agreement about what mattered. Pioneers valued courage and survival. Conquerors valued military glory. Merchants valued productive enterprise. These were concrete, tangible achievements that most people could recognize and respect. Intellectuals, by contrast, live in the realm of ideas. And ideas can be endlessly debated, refined, contradicted. What the intellectual class gains in sophistication, it loses in unity. Glubb observed that in the Age of Intellect, political debate becomes increasingly abstract and polarized. Different factions develop elaborate theories about how society should be organized. They argue past each other because they start from fundamentally different premises. Compromise becomes difficult when each side believes it has discovered the truth. Does this sound familiar? The political polarization in contemporary America has reached levels not seen since the Civil War. According to Pew Research, the ideological overlap between Democrats and Republicans has essentially disappeared. People increasingly live in information bubbles that reinforce their existing beliefs. Each side views the other not just as wrong, but as dangerous. Meanwhile, practical problems go unsolved. Infrastructure crumbles while politicians argue about ideology. The national debt soars while each party blames the other. Foreign policy lurches between extremes with each change of administration. The system that once functioned through compromise now seems paralyzed. The disconnect from physical courage. There's another aspect of the Age of Intellect that Glubb found troubling. Intellectual societies tend to look down on physical courage. The soldier, who was the hero of earlier ages, becomes a figure of suspicion or pity. Military service is left to those without better options. The intellectual class develops elaborate theories about why conflict is unnecessary, why diplomacy can solve all problems, why the whole concept of national interest is outdated. This isn't entirely wrong. Many wars have been unnecessary. Diplomacy has prevented countless conflicts. But Glubb argued that this attitude becomes dangerous when it disconnects a society from the hard realities of power. The world doesn't stop being competitive just because one nation decides competition is passé. Other powers, in earlier stages of their own development, may be more than willing to use force to advance their interests. When an affluent intellectual society faces such powers, it often proves incapable of responding effectively. The Roman Empire didn't fall because Romans forgot how to make philosophical arguments. It fell because they forgot how to fight. And this brings us to the final stage. The word decadence comes from the Latin decadere, meaning to fall. Glubb was careful to define what he meant by it. Decadence, in his framework, isn't about sexual morality or artistic excess, though those might be symptoms. It's about a fundamental loss of purpose, a society that no longer believes in anything strongly enough to sacrifice for it. He identified several markers of decadent societies that appeared consistently across civilizations. First, defensiveness and pessimism replace confidence and ambition. The society that once built and expanded now merely tries to hold what it has. Walls are built, both physical and metaphorical. Investment in the future decreases as people focus on extracting value from the present. Second, public entertainment becomes increasingly important. Glubb pointed to the Roman circuses, where spectacular shows distracted citizens from the empire's problems. The Arab Empire's decline was accompanied by a golden age of popular singers and musicians. The British Empire's sunset years were marked by an obsession with celebrity and sport. He quoted an Arab historian from 10th century Baghdad describing how singers had become national celebrities, how the masses followed their personal lives obsessively, how young people modeled themselves on entertainers rather than scholars or soldiers. The parallels to modern celebrity culture are hard to miss. Third, and perhaps most troubling, the state increasingly tries to buy the loyalty of citizens through welfare payments and public largesse. This isn't a critique of helping the genuinely needy. It's an observation about what happens when the organic economy slows down. When a society can no longer grow naturally, when the commercial energy that created wealth begins to falter, governments turn to redistribution. The phrase bread and circuses comes from Roman times, describing how emperors maintained popular support by providing free grain and entertainment. The problem isn't the programs themselves, the problem is what they represent. A society that has stopped creating and started merely dividing what already exists. One of Glubb's most striking observations concerned how decadent societies respond to serious challenges. They don't respond, or rather, they respond with frivolity. He described how the late Arab Empire saw intense interest in cooking, fashion, and celebrity gossip, even as external threats mounted. How the Byzantine elite debated theological minutiae, while Turkish armies approached the walls. How the British upper classes maintained elaborate social rituals, while the empire visibly crumbled around them. Serious problems demand serious attention. But decadent societies have lost the capacity for seriousness. Everything becomes entertainment, even politics, even existential threats. Watch any major news broadcast today. Foreign policy crises get perhaps 5 minutes of coverage, squeezed between celebrity gossip and lifestyle segments. Political debates increasingly resemble reality television. Complex issues are reduced to sound bites and slogans. This isn't because the problems aren't serious. It's because the audience, shaped by decades of affluence and entertainment, can no longer sustain attention on serious matters. Glubb made an observation that stings. The heroes of declining nations are always the same: the athlete, the singer, or the actor. Think about who Americans celebrate today. Think about who children want to be when they grow up. Think about who gets the most attention, the most money, the most influence. In pioneer times, children wanted to be like the founders. In conquest times, they wanted to be soldiers and explorers. In commercial times, they wanted to be entrepreneurs and inventors. Today, surveys consistently show that influencer and celebrity rank among the top career aspirations of young people. Not creating value, but attracting attention. Not building things, but becoming famous. The shift isn't the fault of young people. They're responding rationally to the incentives their society has created. When celebrity brings more rewards than service, when attention is the primary currency, why wouldn't ambitious people pursue it? But it represents a profound transformation in what society values. And that transformation, Glubb believed, marks the final stage before a major transition. So let's return to where we started. The mathematics of empire. 1776 plus 250 equals 2026. But before we treat this as a prediction of doom, we need to understand what Glubb actually claimed. He was careful to note that the 250-year figure is an average, not an iron law. Some empires lasted longer, some shorter. The duration depends on many factors: geography, external pressures, internal dynamics, even luck. More importantly, the end of empire doesn't mean the end of the nation. Britain didn't disappear when the British Empire faded. It transformed into something different. The United Kingdom today is a prosperous, influential country. It's just not a global hegemon anymore. Rome didn't vanish when the Western Roman Empire fell. It became the foundation for medieval Italy, then Renaissance Italy, then modern Italy. The continuity of civilization is remarkable even through major transitions. What Glubb predicted wasn't destruction, but transformation. The transition from one phase of national existence to another. So where does America actually stand? The evidence suggests we're somewhere in the late stages. We've passed through pioneers and conquests, clearly. We've been in the commercial phase for decades. The signs of affluence, intellect, and possibly decadence are visible to anyone willing to look. The national debt has reached levels that would have been unthinkable to previous generations. As of late 2025, total federal debt exceeds $38 trillion. The debt grows by over $6 billion every day. Interest payments alone consume nearly $1 trillion annually. The dollar, while still dominant, faces challenges it hasn't seen in decades. Its share of global reserves has fallen from about 71% at its peak to around 58% today. Central banks around the world are diversifying into other currencies and gold. Political polarization has reached historic levels. Trust in institutions, from government to media to corporations, has collapsed. Each election is described as the most important in history, Yet nothing fundamental seems to change. Meanwhile, other powers rise. China has become the world's second largest economy and continues to grow. Regional powers challenge American influence in their spheres. The unipolar moment that followed the Cold War appears to be ending. Glubb was pessimistic about whether empires could arrest their decline once it began. The forces at work are generational, embedded in culture and psychology. You can't just decide to become pioneers again. But he also believed that understanding the pattern gave societies their best chance. At minimum, awareness could help individuals prepare for what's coming. At maximum, it might inspire the kind of reforms that could extend a society's peak phase. He pointed to two things that declining empires typically lack, things that might reverse the trend if they could be recovered. First, a value higher than money. In healthy societies, people are motivated by honor, duty, service, faith, or some other ideal that transcends personal gain. When money becomes the supreme value, society loses its cohesion. Second, a spirit of sacrifice for something larger than oneself. Pioneers built because they believed in a future they might not live to see. Decadent generations consume because they don't believe the future matters. Can these values be recovered? Glubb was skeptical but not entirely hopeless. He believed that small groups could maintain the old virtues even as the larger society declined. These groups, preserving what was best from the past, could become the seeds of future regeneration. History, after all, is cyclical. The decline of one civilization creates space for another. The patterns repeat, but they're never quite the same. If there's one thing Glubb wanted his readers to understand, it's that the past has lessons for the present. Not deterministic predictions that lock us into a specific future, but patterns we can learn from. Let's look at some of the specific lessons from empires that have completed this cycle. Rome is the most studied example. The Roman Republic lasted about 233 years before transforming into the empire. The empire itself in the West lasted about 207 years, from Augustus to the traditional date of fall in 476 AD. What caused Rome to fall? Historians have counted over 200 different factors, from lead poisoning to barbarian invasions to Christianity to economic collapse. But reading these explanations through Glubb's framework reveals common themes. Roman currency was debased over centuries as emperors tried to pay for bread in circuses without raising taxes. What had been nearly pure silver coins became copper coins with a thin silver coating. Inflation spiraled. Productive economic activity declined as people realized saving money was pointless when the currency lost value faster than they could earn it. The Roman army, once composed of citizen soldiers who viewed service as an honor, became increasingly reliant on mercenaries from outside Roman culture. These soldiers fought for pay, not patriotism. Their loyalty was to their commanders, not to Rome. When the commanders found it more profitable to fight each other than external enemies, the empire fragmented. The wealthy withdrew from civic life. Rather than investing in public goods or defending the empire, they retreated to their rural estates, building walls around their properties while the wider society crumbled. The phrase self-sufficiency became a way of saying, "I don't need you." The British Empire offers more recent lessons. Britain rose to global dominance through naval power, industrial innovation, and aggressive commerce. At its peak, in the early 20th century, the empire controlled nearly a quarter of the world's land surface and population. 2 world wars drained British resources and broke British confidence. World War I killed nearly 1 million British soldiers and left the country deeply in debt. World War II, though Britain emerged on the winning side, completed the economic exhaustion. India, the jewel in the crown, gained independence in 1947. The Suez Crisis of 1956 demonstrated that Britain could no longer act independently on the world stage. One by one, the colonies gained independence or were handed over. Hong Kong, the last significant possession, was returned to China in 1997. But Britain didn't collapse. It transformed. It remains a wealthy country with a high standard of living. It's still a nuclear power with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. It's just no longer the center of a global empire. The transition wasn't painless. Britain struggled with economic stagnation, labor unrest, and political turmoil throughout the 1970s. But by the 1980s, a new equilibrium had been found. Britain today is different from Imperial Britain, but it's not worse, just different. What connects these examples is a shift in psychology as much as economics or politics. Rising societies believe in the future. They invest in it. They sacrifice for it. They have children and build institutions for those children to inherit. Declining societies become present-focused. They consume rather than invest. They prioritize current enjoyment over future security. Birth rates fall as people decide children are too expensive or too much trouble. Rising societies are united by shared purpose. Whether that purpose is survival, expansion, enrichment, or enlightenment, there's a sense that everyone is working toward something together. Declining societies fragment into competing factions, each focused on extracting maximum benefit for itself. The sense of common purpose fades. Politics becomes a zero-sum game where any gain for one group must come at another's expense. These patterns are not deterministic. Individuals can choose differently. Communities can organize around different values. But Glubb believed that changing the overall direction required recognizing where we are in the cycle. Which brings us to the final question. What can we actually do about it? I want to be very clear about something. This video isn't meant to depress you. It's meant to inform you. Understanding where we are in a historical cycle isn't the same as accepting it passively. Knowledge is power, and the first step toward addressing any problem is recognizing that it exists. So what can be done? At the individual level, Glubb's analysis suggests focusing on resilience and self-reliance. The pioneers who built America didn't wait for institutions to save them. They developed skills, built communities, and prepared for uncertainty. In practical terms, this might mean reducing personal debt, building emergency savings, learning practical skills, investing in relationships and community. The people who weather transitions best are those who aren't entirely dependent on systems that may not survive. It also means thinking carefully about assets. Throughout history, when currencies have been debased and empires have transitioned, tangible assets have held their value better than paper promises. This isn't investment advice, but it's worth noting that gold and silver have been stores of value for thousands of years, across dozens of civilizations and their transitions. Beyond individual preparation, Glubb emphasized the importance of community. The pioneers who built America didn't do it alone. They formed communities, churches, civic organizations. They helped each other through hard times. The social capital they built was as important as any material wealth. One of the symptoms of decline is social atomization. People retreat into their individual lives, their individual screens, their individual concerns. The bonds that held society together fray and break. Reversing this requires conscious effort, joining organizations, participating in local governance, getting to know your neighbors, building networks of mutual support that don't depend on large institutions. Perhaps, most importantly, finding a purpose larger than personal consumption. What Glubb observed was that declining societies lose their sense of meaning. Everything becomes about entertainment and comfort. The great questions, what are we here for, what matters, what's worth sacrificing for, get pushed aside. People who have found meaning tend to be more resilient, more creative, more capable of adapting to change. Whether that meaning comes from faith, family, craft, or service, it provides an anchor that consumer culture cannot. The hope in the pattern. Here's something Glubb didn't emphasize enough, something we should remember as we think about what's coming. The end of an empire is also a beginning. When Rome fell, it didn't mean the end of civilization. It meant the emergence of new civilizations, new powers, new possibilities. The medieval period that followed gave us universities, cathedrals, and the foundations of modern science. When the British Empire receded, it created space for dozens of new nations to find their own paths. Some struggled, but others flourished in ways that would have been impossible under imperial control. Transitions are difficult. Living through them involves uncertainty, challenge, and often hardship. But there are also opportunities. The people who position themselves well, who maintain the pioneer virtues even in decadent times, who build communities and preserve valuable knowledge, these are the people who shape what comes next. Final thoughts. The 250-year clock is ticking. That much seems clear from the historical pattern. Whether 2026 specifically marks any particular milestone, no one can say for certain. History doesn't work on precise schedules, but the broader trend, the transition from one phase of American existence to another, appears to be underway. The question isn't whether this transition will happen. The question is how we respond to it. We can respond with denial, pretending that this time is different, that the patterns of 3,000 years somehow don't apply to us. We can respond with despair, giving up hope and simply waiting for the end. Or we can respond with preparation, adaptation, and even optimism, understanding that the end of one era is the beginning of another, that the skills and virtues that built America the first time can build something new. Sir John Glubb, who spent his life watching empires rise and fall, chose the third option. He believed that studying history wasn't about prediction, but about preparation, about learning from the past to navigate the future. That's what this video has been about. Not a prediction of doom, but an invitation to awareness. Not a counsel of despair, but a call to action. The clock is ticking. But for those who are prepared, the end of an era is the beginning of an opportunity. Thanks for watching. If this video made you think, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others who might find it valuable. The conversation is just beginning.